This is a very momentous day for those of us on the Flight Foundation. We've been working on this project for over a year, which is nothing compared to how long Phil Horning has been working on this project. And to see an event like this come together means a lot to us, a lot to the community, and I think at the end of the day, a lot to advancing and expanding our knowledge of Stafford County history. Now, when I look around a room like this, my job is to introduce all of the dignitaries. There's such a broad cross-section of Stafford County here. Pretty much everybody in this room is a dignitary in their own field. So this is going to be very difficult. If I miss anybody, feel free to raise your hand and yell at me. I give most of my presentations to the Board of Supervisors, so I'm used to getting interrupted with questions. That's not a problem. So we have Delegate Tara Durant is joining us. Tara's in the back. Delegate Phil Scott, standing in the back as well. From Stafford County, we have Board of Supervisor member Daryl English from the Hartwood District. Daryl's right there. Monica Gary from the Aquia District. Where is Monica? There's Monica. Meg Bomke from the Falmouth District. From Prince William County Board of Supervisors, we have Yesley Vega. There's Yesley. I've been seeing you in Stafford a lot these days. From the EDA, we have Jack Rowley. The EDA has been tremendously helpful as we try and get this project off the ground, pun intended. From the Airport Authority, we have Hank Sharpenberg, Rod Hall, Chair Jack Evers. Did I pronounce that correctly? John Evers. Did I get the last name correct?
John Eves.
John Eves. With a goofy name like Mayoski, I should be more sensitive to that. And we want to thank the airport manager, Jim Stover, for helping put all of this together today. A very special thank you to the Sammy brothers. If you don't know who the Sammy brothers are, they're the owners of Chapawamsic Island. These flights occurred off the coast of Chapawamsic Island, so it had played a very important role in bringing flight and Langley proving that mechanical flight was possible. And a very special thanks to Mary Catherine and Phil Horning. They donated $5,000 to make this event happen, but more importantly, we're here because of Phil Horning. Anybody who knows Phil knows that he is determined when he gets an idea in his head. And in this case, what he did was bring to light a very important piece of not only Stafford County history, but this is really national history. This is history that changed the world. What Samuel Langley did changed transportation and the world forever. It's a story that wasn't told in Stafford County when Chris and I went to Stafford County schools, but it's one that we need to start telling now, and with Phil's determination, that's one of the reasons why we're here. We also received a $3,000 grant from Stafford County Tourism, so we want to thank them for their efforts in one, supporting this endeavor and making this happen. So thank you all for coming. It's going to be a fantastic show.
And thank you so very much. I am Vice President of the Langley Flight Foundation and co-founder, along with Chris as the founder. We're a 501c3 corporation, and on behalf of the Langley Flight Foundation, I'd like to thank the Stafford Regional Airport Authority, consisting of representatives from Stafford County, Prince William County, and the city of Fredericksburg, for allowing us to use this beautiful facility for this event. This airport was built to spur business development in the region, particularly in the field of aviation. Its new runway extension, which will be completed this fall, will be a major boost to this mission. The Langley Flight Foundation wants to do its part to preserve Virginia's air and space history, to attract new and enhance existing businesses, to promote tourism, and to enhance STEM educational opportunities for students in the region. Our journey begins with you this evening and with our presentation entitled The Dawn of Mechanical Flight, Stafford County, Virginia, 1896, the opening of the Great Universal Highway overhead. Regrettably, one of this evening's presenters, Tom Crouch, retired senior curator in aeronautics in the Smithsonian Air Museum, is unable to be here with us this evening because of a family crisis. Paul Glenshaw is an artist, filmmaker, and educator with more than 25 years of experience working across disciplines in arts, history, and sciences. He is a frequent contributor to the Smithsonian Air and Space magazine. He has created educational programs for the Wright Experience and the Discovery Flight Foundation, and is co-writer and co-director of the PBS documentary, The Lafayette Escadrille. Chris Horning, president of the Langley Flight Foundation. Raised in Stafford County, he has had a lifelong passage for history and archaeology. He is currently the Chief Development Officer for the Rappahannock Development Group in Fredericksburg. Chris is a former member and chairman of the Fredericksburg Economic Development Authority. He is currently a member and former chairman of the Fredericksburg Planning Commission, the Amber Mill Community Development Authority, and the Stafford County Historical Society. He currently serves as vice chairman of the Stafford Regional Airport Authority Board of Directors. During the Second World War, and then on his daily ABC radio series, Paul Harvey began his show with a segment called The Rest of the Story. A little bit about this show. This segment of the show consisted of stories presented of little known or forgotten facts on a variety of subjects. Some of them with a key element to the story was withheld to the end. The broadcast always concluded with a variation of the tagline, "And now you know the rest of the story." As I look around here this evening, some of you don't remember this show or listening to the show. Others of us do, and may be somewhat reluctant to admit it. There is a historical marker on Widewater Road that reads, quote, "Professor Samuel Pierpont Langley launched a steam-powered airplane from a houseboat off its shore," end quote. Not many people have visited this historical marker. On December 8th, 1903, Langley's 1903 Aerodrome A, that flight, crashed into the Potomac River, almost drowning its pilot, Charles Manley. And now, for the rest of the story.
Thank you, Chris and the Foundation, for having me here this evening. Thank you all for coming. I hope I can I'll be giving you the backstory. How did this come to be? How did this come to happen here? What was going on before Langley came? And what made him so significant? Chris is going to tell you the story of what actually happened here in 1896. This absolutely extraordinary moment. And then we'll be talking about how this can really be relevant to you, to your kids, to the community. I've seen it happen. I've helped make it happen in other places. There are proven models to show, not just proven models that show that flight is possible, but that showing and telling these stories can be really powerful and effective. And for me, the reason I'm holding this, I'll show you in just a sec. It's kind of personal. So this print of Samuel Pierpont Langley, can everybody see it? Okay, this hung on my bedroom wall starting when I was about 7. Yeah, because I was taken to the National Air and Space Museum, I saw the Aerodrome, and suffice to say, it rearranged my molecules. To look at that as a 7-year-old kid, and all of us here, I mean, look right behind me, we have, none of us, never not known that airplanes were real, that mechanical flight was possible. And there was something in my little 7-year-old brain that told me, like, wow, you know, just what that must have been to start from that blank sheet of paper, and they made that. And it worked. Even at 7, I had this sort of just awe of what that story meant. So I'm going to start in. We're going to get to kind of who Langley was and why he was so important, and then we'll take it from there. Sound like a plan? All right. Well, it's the plan we have, so we're kind of stuck with it, I guess. Anyway. So, human beings have been flying for a very long time. It started in France in 1783 with the Montgolfier brothers. This is a beautiful painting from the Prado in Madrid that shows Montgolfier brothers balloon flying in Spain. But yeah, people have been getting up in the air and seeing the air from above for a very long time, right after, you know, in fact, during the time of our own revolution. So human flight has been possible. We've known that for a very long time. But flying in a machine, in a mechanical machine that's heavier than air, that was the thing that we can control. That was the thing that was so elusive. That was the thing that was the big dream. And it began also quite a long time ago. I mean, some of the first, this gentleman, Sir George Cayley, was an English baron, very wealthy guy, and as kind of a gentleman's hobby, he got interested in the possibility of flight and started building gliders. As early as, let me look at my cheat sheet here, his first was in 1804. We're starting to think about, okay, what would that machine start to look like? And we're already starting to see, you know, aspects that will become familiar to us. There's a little fuselage here. There's a thing to hold the person. There's wheels. There's some kind of control surface and a big wing. Again, starting from that blank sheet of paper, how do you get to what an airplane looks like when it has never been done? And he actually did start getting them flying. He didn't fly them himself. He put his coachman in one, I believe, and a young boy, and shot them down the hill. But it did get into the air and did land. Controllable, bit of a death trap perhaps, but a serious attempt. Then we get on to some of the other thinkers about flight. Not just people who were, you know, just often left field somewhere, but very serious thinkers like Daniel Bernoulli, who came up with Bernoulli's principle about, which is one of the aspects about the differentials in pressure on a surface that can help it perhaps lift. Francis Herbert Wenham was the inventor of, I believe in the 1840s, of the wind tunnel for studying how a fluid moves across a surface. Very, very important. We use wind tunnels today all the time. Alphonse Pénaud, who in the 1870s was building rubber band powered models. Look at the little one right here. It's called a planophore. And if you look at it, just imagine there's a little vertical tail there. You are seeing the outline or the basic format of the modern airplane. Okay? But all very small, very small. Lawrence Hargrave worked with kites, big kites that could carry a human being. So we're starting to get, you know, we see these little steps that are happening. Hargrave, as Tom Crouch, is basically the inventor of the biplane. We get people like Stringfellow and Henson from the UK, who actually started a company to start to sell flights, you know, and with the idea of having a machine And this is the layout of their machine. Now, I just showed you the Cayley one. Look at how much further we've come in just, in not too many years. We almost recognize this is, in fact, an ad. Visit the Great Pyramids by air. We've all grown up with aviation ads like that. But look at it. Fuselage, wheels, a large monoplane. He's got the propellers in the back. There's the tail. Windows for people to look out of. This concept, now the airplane never was built, but the concept was there. And it's helped start to give people the idea that this was not only possible, there was a vision for it. And there could be a practical application. Now, starting to get to actual machines. We're getting closer to Langley all the time. Clément Ader in France with his Éole. And that's a painting of it. The real thing, it was a real machine, powered machine, actually topped a little bit off the ground. No way really to control it, so that could ruin your whole afternoon. But a very serious attempt. Hiram Maxim, one of the inventors of the machine gun, took on the problem. This is a picture of his machine in England. And all he was trying to do was that you could get a machine off the ground from the ground. And this was not meant to really fly. In fact, it rolled along on tracks. And there were two sets of tracks, one that the wheels sat on and one that was right over the wheels. So we would just fly in that little space. And they got it going. This huge steam engine on this thing, immensely powerful. Fired the thing up, shot it down the track. It actually rose. And then one of the wheels got outside the thing. And that was the end of that. But all of these efforts becoming more and more serious. But the leading scientific authorities of the day, and you can see in this slide, the word impossible. Lord Kelvin, great British mathematician and physicist. I can say flatly, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. This is what the science that they knew told them of that time. Professor Joseph Leconte, a pure flying machine is impossible. Even Edison, I cannot conceive it. So the idea of pursuing flight seriously was still something a little out in left field, something a little bit for, a lot of skepticism around it. Enter Samuel Pierpont Langley. He was born in Boston in 1834. Definitely Boston Brahmin, upper class, very blue blood. Educated at the English high school, and he was an outstanding draftsman. You'll see an example of that in a minute. But that's the extent of his formal education. He became an outstanding astronomer and actually worked at the Harvard Observatory. He became very good at grinding telescope lenses and making solar observations. He eventually became the director of the Allegheny Observatory in 1867. And he was one of the first to actually study sunspots. This is what really built his reputation. It's a great thing that he wrote here. And it's very relevant to the mission of this foundation. Science is not for the professional student only, but that everyone will take an interest in its results if they are only put before the world in the right way. It's open to us all only if it's put before the world in the right way. Now this is a drawing that he did, and I draw too. And this is a drawing that he made looking through one of his telescopes at the sun. That's a sunspot. He was one of the first people to study these things. And the level of detail and just the sheer beauty of it is just extraordinary. So we're showing you this to kind of give you a sense of the man, who he was, the kind of the level he was working at. A guy who does not go to college is winding up teaching mathematics at the Naval Academy, is winding up as the director of the Allegheny Observatory in Pittsburgh. That's the kind of brain this man had. Just to give you a sense, some of the medals he started to win from across the world. A renowned scientist. Now, when his molecules got rearranged was in 1886 in Buffalo, New York. He went to the American Association for the Advancement of Science conference in Buffalo to attend a lecture by a guy named Israel Lancaster. This was a meeting that had been put together by a guy named Octave Chanute. I'll tell you who he was in a minute. And it was about aerial experiments. And just about everybody there thought it was kind of was a little silly. But Langley was hooked. Langley saw the possibility by attending this lecture. He comes back to Pittsburgh, and then later in Washington, starts conducting experiments with this thing. This is called a whirling arm. It's got a lifting surface on one end, it's got a weight on the other, and the thing spins. It's huge. And what you could do is put different test surfaces on this thing and set them at different angles of attack and whirl them through the air and see how they worked, see what kind of lift they generated. He's doing experiments. He's trying to figure out what makes a wing work. So we're going out of the realm of an English baron throwing his coachman down a hill in a glider that he hopes might work to a very serious scientific mind trying to pull this puzzle apart. What is it that could make an airplane work? Now, he becomes the third secretary of the Smithsonian in 1887, and he comes to this area. So now we've got Langley here. And he had started his actual flying machine experiments in Pittsburgh, but then carried on at the Smithsonian. And this just gives you a little bit of a sense of where he was starting to work. He took off from the idea that Alphonse Pénaud had of the rubber band-powered model airplane. Now, we've all known what those things were, right? Well, Langley was making them in the Smithsonian Castle and flying them. Nobody else in the country, of course, had them. And you can see here the evolution of his design as he's trying to figure out, well, how wide should the wings be? What length should they be? Where do you put propellers? What do propellers look like? What do I make this thing out of? All these different experiments. And the beautiful part about the model, and this is what he carries forward, is that you're not investing a huge amount into a machine that you're hoping can work. You can cut and try and cut and try and cut and try. And that becomes the foundation for his basic method. The thing that makes him so different is that, unlike a lot of the other experimenters at the time who were just working on their own, look at that picture. Look at that building. Who here doesn't know what that building is and what it represents? The Smithsonian. He's doing this at the Smithsonian. He turns the Smithsonian Castle into the DARPA of its day. Now, this is cutting-edge thought and experiment, trying to figure out what an airplane might be, a mechanical flying machine. So he's putting the power and the prestige, also the reputation of this institution and his own on the line. That's a gutsy thing to do. If you want to continue having a great career as the preeminent scientist of the United States, there's a lot of other safer things you could go into. But he goes for this. That takes guts. I wish to put on record my belief that this solution, it is here shown, cannot longer be considered beyond our capacity to reach. He publishes his experiments in aerodynamics in, let me get my cheat sheet out again, 1891. Thanks, Chris. So he starts to publish. Very, very important. Now, I mentioned the name Octave Chanute before. Octave Chanute was born in 1832 in Paris. He grew up in New Orleans. He was a French-American engineer, mostly did railroad bridges. Very, very successful guy. But as he started nearing his retirement, he got interested as a serious engineer in the flying machine problem. And he became kind of a clearinghouse of information. He kind of gathered everything that was going on in flight at the time. And it was Chanute who put together the meeting that Langley went to. It was Chanute, and he and Langley were only 2 years apart in age, who really encouraged Langley to pursue this. And so he was a guy who really fanned the flames. Since the publication of Dr. Langley's experiments in aerodynamics, it is the exception to find an intelligent engineer who disputed the probability of the eventual solution of the problem of manned flight. So very interesting. It's the engineers who crack this, not the scientists. The scientists are skeptical. The engineers think we can make a thing that could work. So now we start getting into the actual machines that he built to get to the one that flew here, the one that's represented here. So these are, and this is a great thing with, if you're a historical researcher like I am. Langley photographed everything and took, and did photographs where they're all labeled. Here's number 0 in 1891, number 1 in 1892, number 2 in 1890, and he's trying to figure out what this should be, how big it should be, what the engine should be. Langley is all about power. He's about trying to figure out what sort of power plant do we put in this thing? How do we get enough power at a light enough weight with a strong enough machine that it will be able to lift itself and propel itself through the air, and of significant size. His concept has leaped way beyond the rubber bands. So what we're starting to see is in each case, the machine is pointing up. So this is the nose, right? And he's thinking, okay, power plant in the center, we make a place for that, and then we'll try propellers here. No, we'll try propellers here. No, well, how about if we just do it as a cross, not as an A? Okay, and a little further up. So you can see him experimenting and the people he worked with. And now we're starting to see them getting even more and more sophisticated. Number 4. Number 4 improved. Number 5. Number 6. Number 5 and number 6. Those are the ones. Number 5 is first. We'll get to that in a second. In fact, there it is. Aerodrome number 5, the original machine, is still in the collection of the Smithsonian Institution. So, now I've given you the backstory. Is everybody with me so far? Doing all right? Okay. So this is where Langley is by 1896. The thing is, he is not alone in the world in terms of working this problem. Talk to you briefly about this gentleman, Otto Lilienthal of Prussia. Otto Lilienthal is himself, by this point, actually flying. That's him. There's a lot of space in this picture between his little feet and the ground. He's in the air, but he's not flying a powered airplane. He's flying a glider. He was a German engineer who became convinced that looking at the way birds were constructed would be the foundation for how you could make mechanical wings for human beings. And that was the basis. In fact, his book was called Bird Flight is the Basis for Aviation. That is what he based his work on. And he made gliders. He made his own hill and launched himself off. It's the forerunner of the modern hang glider. And have any of you ever seen somebody fly a hang glider? My son flies hang gliders. I've seen him go off a mountain. It's a little, he knows what he's doing, but it still makes my heart stop. And so Lilienthal doing this, and he doesn't have a helmet. And he's figuring it out as he's going through the air. Okay, so Lilienthal's experiments ended one day, also in 1896, on the 9th of August, when he tragically lost control of his glider, and it stalled and it crashed and it broke his neck. So he gave his life for it, and allegedly his last words were, "Sacrifices must be made." An incredibly brave guy. Octave Chanute, the railroad engineer, has also started experimenting with gliders. He's elderly at this point, so he's getting his assistant, Augustus Herring, and this is in Indiana, the sand dunes near Lake Michigan. And a couple of dogs. You should have dogs when you're doing flying machine experiments. I mean, you should, anyway. But this is also a weight-shifting machine. So it's very interesting to look at the different approaches. Langley is all about power and not worried about control. He's of the mind that the machine should be able to stabilize itself. Lilienthal and Chanute are all about getting a human being in the air and trying to do something about control, but just throwing their weight around. As I always say to people, imagine you're coming into National, right? And the pilot says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach. Would you all move to the front of the plane, please?" Not a good long-term solution. So, the Smithsonian and down to Chopwamsick.
So we're going to start getting to Stafford County. So Chapawamsek Island is the northeast tip of Stafford. Most people consider that to be part of Quantico. It's inaccessible otherwise by boat. We did get to visit it not too long ago, shot some drone footage you can see on our website. Thank you to the Sammys who let us do that, and the U.S. Marine Corps who escorted us to the island that day so we could shoot some drone video. So this is just an overlay of the nautical maps of the island from 1896, right on top. You can see at the time it had a very distinct boomerang shape. And if you look at aerials today, you'll notice that Chapawamsek Creek used to come in over here. Today, it's been moved. This area over here was reclaimed for the runway for MCAF on the Marine Corps base. So if you are looking to match up a photo, it's a little difficult because the landforms are different. Here's that overall map. You can see here's Chapawamsek Creek coming out, and again, today it comes out over here. You'll also see with sea level rise that a lot of these out pieces have disappeared, these outer edges. So why did Langley come to Stafford County? There's a number of reasons he came to Chapawamsek Island. Probably one of the most important ones was it was secluded. We're talking about the coast of Stafford where there are very few residents living. This is from our drone video we shot earlier. The other is the proximity to the railroad. He could directly from the Smithsonian bring the aerodromes down by rail, get off at Quantico Junction, and come over by barge, boat, over to the island. The other important thing is that there were accommodations on the island. The island was bought in 1887 by the Mount Vernon Ducking Club, which ran a hunting lodge for wealthy members, a lot of politicians. There were presidents who were members of this club that would stay on the island and then be taken out by Stafford residents to the hunting areas to hunt for bird, to fish. There were accommodations on the island. It was called a handsome clubhouse in 1887. This is video of some of the structures that still remain today. And then the other reason why that he chose it is because his aerodrome had no landing gear. In order to save weight, his solution was to launch his aerodrome from atop a houseboat moored in the Potomac River. What that did was allow him to maneuver the direction of launch any way he wanted to launch into the wind, which was required to get the lift needed. And also it was shallow, so when the inevitable descent occurred, they could recover the aerodrome from the water. Here's a picture of it. You can see our representation. This is not our final model. This is a relatively quick put together to kind of show you that while people call this a model, it is a substantial craft. Has a boiler on it, one of the first steam-powered machines to fly, or was the first to fly. Here's his houseboat, and this picture was taken by Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, on May 6th, 1896. This was right before the launch of Aerodrome number 5. You can see the launching apparatus, this, what's it called, a skiff sitting out here with a makeshift boat that they could store and have quarters in. The workers launched it from atop. It was mounted to the top of this rail and then used a steam-powered apparatus to shoot it off the end into the air. He began testing models in 1893 here off the coast of Chapawamsek Island. It wasn't until 1896 that he finally got it right. And this picture is taken of number 5, which was the first successful flight, but it was taken after his first launch, which failed earlier in the day. Earlier in the day, they tried to launch Aerodrome number 6. It caught on the launching platform. It crashed into the water with Alexander Graham Bell, the famous scientist and inventor, observing. You can imagine these guys getting set up, having all these folks here watching and having the thing crash into the water. You can actually see the wing of Aerodrome number 6 and the body of it in the underneath where they pulled it out of the water and reset it. So at around 3:05, they put Aerodrome number 5 on the launching platform and launched it. And to Paul's point earlier, when he was saying, can you imagine being on there, that you're working on this concept for so many years, thinking it's possible. When you actually launch it, it drops for about 4 feet in the first couple of seconds, and then it begins to rise. It rises up to about 100 feet. It flies for 3,300 feet over a minute and a half. So we're not talking about a small skip or a small jump like some of these other inventors. This is the first time that the achievement of flight was real.
Could I jump in with something?
Sure.
So just trying to put yourself in that moment. All of them knew it was going to go down. Eventually it was going to go down. But to see it actually go up, just imagine being in that moment, that there it is rising. A machine is rising on its own, and not a little machine, and not just for a second or two. It keeps going and going and going. That's what happened. That is the moment. It's possible. It's actually possible.
And here's the map that they drew. This is Aerodrome number 5's route as it went in large circles. The second route is Aerodrome number 6, which is in November of 1896. We'll just touch on in a few minutes. Of the photos of this event, there are a few that made it into the actual publication. One was the Alexander Graham Bell photos you saw earlier. The others were these two that were taken by Frederick Fowle. He was an assistant. The pictures are fairly poor quality, and they do capture the aerodrome in flight. But that's about the extent of the photos that were provided in the official record. But there were more taken, and Frederick Fowle's photos were actually wider than what's depicted. This keeps going in and out. Wider than what was depicted in those smaller photos in the excerpts shown. There were 3 photos taken by Alexander Graham Bell, and there were 7 taken by Frederick Fowle. You can see a few things when you look at the wider picture. Earlier we were looking at Alexander Graham Bell's zoom in here, but as you look at the wider, the original picture that's in the archives at the Smithsonian, you can see more of Chapawamsik Island. You can see what looks like a structure on the island, possibly the clubhouse. You can see the wing of Aerodrome number 6 and boat houses or some type of a structure that were used for, either waterfowl hunting or storing boats as part of the hunt club. If you take these pictures and realize that Fowle took a series of them in a row and he was in the same point, you can actually put together a sequence of what happened and create a composite image. And that's what we've done. So these photos are excerpts of these larger pictures. And in the background, this is the Stafford County shoreline that you can see in the distance. When you take those two, which are numbered number 6 and number 7, and you add to them number 4, which was taken right at the launch when the aerodrome is starting to drop, you can put together, when you arrange them and matching up the trees in the background, a composite image. Then when you zoom in and you look at the trees, shows the flight path of what Fowle would have observed and likely Langley on the shore as it was launched, and it continued its circles, and he captured those photos as it worked its way up to a height of about 100 feet. And then when the boiler ran out of water and it slowly drifted and coasted its way down to the water surface. This is an animation we put together. We tried to get a professional one. We couldn't get it done in time, so we have this one. But it does show what that would have looked like from the air in 1896. And I want to read a quote that was from a Stafford resident of the time that we believe is a plant by Langley himself or one of his men. It actually says in here, it is both flying fowl and swimming fish. I happened accidentally to be placed in a position to witness the experiment of the 6th of May. My heart jumped into my mouth as the toy naphtha engine began to revolve its little wheels and vent its hisp like the whisper of a zephyr. Slowly, the great bird began to sail away, gracefully as the eagle, and with as sublime a confidence in itself as the eagle feels the strange creature rose higher and higher, choosing a circular course for some reason I cannot explain. Twice it traversed this circular path, soaring more steadily than the frightened buzzards which watched it from far away, and then its motion was retarded by the lessening pressure of the steamer. Starting slowly on its descent, it swung once more around a segment of the circle, and gradually and gently as a feather, it wafted downward till it settled in the shallow water. It had not sustained the least injury. Stafford education for you right there. I was well written, and so I suspect that may have been written by someone for the paper as a plant, but an illustration of what that must have looked like or felt like. Alexander Graham Bell wrote about it after the fact, and he said, "Last Wednesday, May 6th, I witnessed a very remarkable experiment with Professor Langley's Aerodrome on the Potomac River. Indeed, it seemed to me that this experiment was of such historical importance that it should be made public. No one could have witnessed these experiments without being convinced that the practicality of mechanical flight had been demonstrated." The newspaper articles that came out in May and June are remarkable. We will fly soon. Professor Langley has really solved the great question of aerial transit. Steam-propelled aerodrome flew half a mile. Scientists say that Langley has solved the problem of human flight. The miracle, Professor Langley. Goodbye to horses and bicycles. Professor Langley's machine soars. And then one that was a little dramatic that is one of my favorites. Let's see if I can get this to... Far greater significance to the future of humanity than the dove which winged its way from the Ark of Noah. It's a great quote, and yet hardly any of us know anything about it. It's amazing. In 1896, we have this acclaim for this achievement that occurred here, and yet today we don't even know about it. The expectation was after this there would be a deluge of flying machine experiments, and that it would no longer be just gentlemen with lofty titles, but it would be every man who would be pursuing aerial flight. There's another key statement. Prior to Langley, the bulk of flight experiments were being done in Europe, mostly England, France. One of the great things about Langley's achievement is that it was an American. This is a day when Americans weren't necessarily considered the experts in science and engineering. What he achieved was remarkable. And you can see in many newspapers of the day, an American is to gain the honor. It really put the United States in the forefront of achieving the success of flight and the advancement of flight, which has continued to this day. In November of 1896, Langley followed up with Aerodrome number 6, which flew for 4,200 feet at almost 32 miles an hour, so longer than Aerodrome number 5. Same spot, Chapawamsek Island, you saw on that map. There is an article that we'll be putting on our website from the New Flying Machine where Langley himself speaks about why he did this. And there was a couple of important quotes from him. Langley really, in his words, said, "I'm doing this for the benefit of humanity. I have done this work. My work is now done, and now we can expect this great universal highway to be open." He also didn't patent any of his inventions, and he took the photos Paul was talking about earlier. He published those. He provided them to the world. But I wanted to put this picture up here to just show you how incredibly complex Langley's machines were. This was a real struggle to get this model built here. And then I look at this with these wires. It's perhaps a little over-engineered, but it's remarkably complicated. And when we were talking to Tom Crouch the other day, he said that Langley's machines were built almost like Swiss watches, perhaps to his detriment. He was so keen on all of these complicated movements. And in some ways, his focus on the power plant and the structure ultimately led to some of his failures in achieving manned flight.
So the thing about Langley's story that's very important to remember is that it has distinct chapters. And the chapter that comes to its conclusion in 1896 is really the most important one because of what Chris was just talking about, this proven, witnessed, photographed, documented demonstration that mechanical flight is possible. Then the USS Maine blows up in Havana. Related? Yes. Why? The military gets very interested in, hey, could this invention, Professor Langley, be scaled up to carry a human being? Here's some money. Chapter 2 starts. And this is a whole other goal. It's a whole other thing that he takes place. He's got a successful design. He scales it up. He actually scales it up to a 1/4 scale version of the full machine. How many of you have been to the Haase Center and seen the Langley Aerodrome A, the original man-carrying machine still exists, and it's there. This is the 1/4 scale version, which they flew in Widewater, Virginia, a little further away, or a little closer in, I forget, and had 4 successful flights with this machine. So Langley feels he's on a very solid path because of the success in 1896. Now, again, success in 1891. He's actually got a 1/4 scale version of the internal combustion engine. They've moved from steam to gasoline at this point. Beautiful, beautiful machines. When you get a chance to look at them, I actually had a chance to go up in a little cherry picker up to the big one, the Grand Aerodrome. And it's just so magnificent. It's just so beautiful. And I'm going to totally name drop here. So in 2003, I got a tour of the Haase Center before it opened because I was working on the centennial of first flight stuff. And I had to give these presentations to a commission at national headquarters, and one of the people on the commission was Neil Armstrong. Name drop, boom. Neil Armstrong and all the rest of us were put in buses and taken out to the Haase Center to see it, kind of a preview before it opened. So I couldn't believe I was there. And Neil Armstrong was walking around, and a lot of the airplanes stuff were coming in, and there's stuff all over the place. And there's this big thing. We're on one of those bridges, and he looks down, there's this big thing covered in plastic. And he asked somebody from NASA, "Can you tell me what that is?" And that's not me, is it? No. They didn't know, and I said, "It's Langley's Aerodrome." And he took off running. And I chased him, and he ran down the stairs, and by the time I got to him, he was under the plastic. And his eyes were like this. And he's just like, wow. He's just in awe of Neil Armstrong. It said he was just so amazed to see that machine. And when I was there when they got the 30th anniversary of the landing of the moon, and the Apollo 11 astronauts got the Smithsonian medal, and Armstrong talked about Langley. He talked about a lot of other people too, but he made sure that he talked about Langley. So yes, his experiment in 1903 to fly the full-scale Grand Aerodrome both ended in failure. He had 2 attempts to fly it. Both attempts failed. Failure was nothing new to Langley. Failure is always an option for Langley. He was always, trying and trying and trying. However, the government cut off his funding, much like they did for the Apollo missions. How about that? A second attempt was made in December of 1903, right near Haines Point near D.C., and the machine was not structurally sound. Fortunately, his assistant and pilot, Charles Manley, survived.
Paul?
Yeah.
You go back to that real quick.
Sure.
One thing of Stafford County history I thought it was pretty interesting is he was still using Chapawamsek Island in 1903 in his earlier flights. And this article, which appeared in 1903, talks about the fact that the members of the club got so angry that they threatened to show up armed, 14 men armed, to kick Langley and his scientists off the island so they could have their hunting ground, because he had essentially commandeered the island for his experiments. So just kind of a really kind of interesting story, asking, there are 14 of them and about 6 of us, can you shoot? So he did move. He relocated to, I think, the Maryland coast for his base of operations after that, and then before he went up and flew in D.C.
Yeah. And of course, the first successful heavier-than-air, manned, powered, controlled flight, the airplane, is achieved by the Wright brothers in December. Just 9 days after Langley's second attempt fails, the Wright brothers succeed. This is a whole other story. And the Wright brothers are, in fact, the inventors of the airplane, if we define the airplane as controlled, manned, heavier-than-air, powered, no, okay? However, it's really important to note what Wilbur Wright wrote when Langley died, a few years after Langley died. Langley died in 1906. And Wilbur wrote to Charles Walcott, the secretary of the Smithsonian, Although the honor of the first practical demonstration of the possibility of mechanical flight has been claimed for prior experiments of Hargreaves, Maxim, Adair, Tatin, and Penaud, all the guys I mentioned before, I think Professor Langley has a stronger claim than any of them. His demonstration had a convincing character which none of these others possessed. It had great influence in determining my brother and myself to take up this work in this science, and without doubt, similarly influenced others. So there's the credit where credit is due. And Chanute said he rescued the problem from contempt. He laid the lines which must be followed, and having published the results of his experiments and giving other men data upon which to conquer the air, he will ever be remembered as the precursor and the pathfinder of successful flying machines. Except we don't remember him, do we? Don't you think we should? Don't you think it deserves something? Maybe right here? I think so.
I think that's back to me.
Oh,
So why do we have you here? Building on what Paul just said, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Langley. One, unrelenting curiosity and perseverance over adversity. There are numerous articles and things written in the paper from 1891 to 1896 really calling Langley crazy, that his ideas were nuts, that he was out of his mind, that he was risking the reputation of the Smithsonian and himself on this. He believed that if nature had solved it, man could as well, and he kept working the problem. The second that he talked about was the application of practical knowledge. He did not have a higher education, but what he did was he tested his hypothesis and he worked it over and over and over again. He accumulated data, and at the end of the day believed that if he could demonstrate that it would work to the point where any man could see it, understand it, feel it, touch it, that he would have, that we would eventually get to the point of having human manned flight. A lesson that he probably would prefer we don't, that he may not have exhibited was fearless recalibration. Langley was so focused on building a plane essentially with the parts of a ship. He was focused on the body, on the power, pushing through the air. He called this an aerodrome, which is air runner, whereas we now know it as an aeroplane, which focuses on the wing. He was all about the central part of the body, not so much about the wing itself. The Wright brothers focused on the wing, and that became the successful model for the airplane. He did say what is obvious in the retrospect is not always apparent in the time of action. I think that's a good saying, because I think if he were here today, he certainly would agree with it. But he didn't recalibrate. What he did was he took his successful model and he tried to upsize it. And structurally, and from a power standpoint, it simply couldn't achieve manned flight. Which is interesting to keep in mind, because as we talk about his legacy, it's not just about his success, it's also about why he failed and what we can learn from that. And then finally, be an inspiration for the common good. His comment was in the paper, and now reward must be looked for, if reward there be, in the knowledge that I have done the best I could in a difficult task with results which it may be hoped will be useful to others. He believed what he was doing was for the common good, and I think that's an important lesson. So our mission, it started off 3 or 4 years ago when Phil was talking about we should build a model and we should hang it here and we should have interpretation and do this stuff. It's grown. It's grown since we started talking about that. That presentation we put together just kind of shows all of the avenues that can be explored with telling this story. We have this beautiful facility here with a runway expansion underway, huge opportunities to attract and build on the aviation-based businesses we already have in the region. Drone research, aviation research, all of that can be expanded here. And what better place to locate those businesses than the home of the birth of mechanical, heavier than air mechanical flight. Tourism, building this replica model that we would like to build. Our plan is that it can be lowered and raised, and that we'll have interpretation in the airport terminal here that people can go and look at and learn this story and learn all these parts we're talking about. It may not on its own pull millions of people off the interstate, but it enhances the tourism opportunities and offerings we have in the county to build on the great offerings we have today. So the idea is that we're building on that, and we're providing a place in the county locally that people can come to. You can bring kids in school trips to learn about something and teach some of these lessons without having to go to DC. We can do it right here, where they can come on the weekends with their family. Oh, sorry. And then STEAM. I originally put STEM. I've been educated since then, STEAM education. Paul has done a tremendous amount in working on curricula based on flight. With this replica experiment, there are tons of opportunity in science and math and lessons that can be taught in school where kids from the region can actually see what somebody did and learn the lessons we talked about earlier. I don't know if you want to talk briefly about some of the stuff you've done, but tons of opportunity. And our hope is that we could partner with the school system. I know there's some folks from the school system here today to explore what works with kids in this area. What can we do to help the school system really build and encourage kids to get into science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts based on this story? There are many ways this story can be told. In talking about tourism, we have been in conversation with representatives, former representatives of Smithsonian, where we talked about, would it be possible down the road, either here with us or working with the Stafford County Historical Society and the future Stafford Museum that we hope will happen, to bring some of Langley's original artifacts and documents here. There's certain accreditation that is required in order to do that, but we believe there's opportunity to do that. There are many things that are stored, put away by the Smithsonian that are not displayed that would be wonderful examples, such as some of his early models, some of his calculations and things that we could bring. And one of the points we want to make up is that some of these folks we talked about earlier that attempted to achieve manned flight, Lilienthal and others, they have museums. They have places in Germany and in other parts of the world that have these museums dedicated to their achievements and their contributions to flight. There's no reason why we can't do that here. So our primary goal is to initially get this aerodrome built. And we're fortunate that the foremost experts in building replicas of historical aircraft are located right in Virginia in Warrenton, the Wright experience. I think you used to be an employee. I think Bill Haddon, who was here with the Smithsonian, was a former employee. They are the experts in building Wright flyers. They built more Wright flyers than anyone other than the Wright brothers. Our group has contacted them and has a draft proposal for them to construct an exact replica. And by exact, we mean these are done to museum standards to put on display here. That would be on a pulley system that would allow it to be dropped down to the floor to have interpretive discussions and school trips to come and look at what he built as the first successful heavier-than-air powered flyer. The price tag on that is expensive. It's a $250,000 replica. We feel that that is important. We think representing it here, short of having the actual one here, is important. This looks kind of cool, but it's made out of copper pipe. So ultimately, we'd like to have one that looks exactly like the one that was built. And we're hopeful that there is enough community support, political support, to help us bring that forward. We're getting ready to kick off our fundraising campaign to look for corporate donations, to try to find aerospace companies that would be willing to help contribute, that would be willing to sponsor and help us tell that message. But equally, down the road, we probably are going to require some assistance from the public, either through the county, the EDA, who's been very supportive of our efforts with the $15,000 grant they gave us for marketing to pull this off. And when it comes to STEAM initiatives, there are just so many different ways that we can engage kids in this, to inspire kids to get involved in this project. You want to mention just real quick?
Sure. So there's the thing that where you have a great advantage is in pursuing a project like this, and especially all of these goals that Chris has laid out. There are outstanding examples of projects like this in other parts of the country that have worked very well. So you are not like Langley and starting from a blank sheet of paper. I highly recommend if any of you go to Prince George's County, Maryland, and go to the College Park Aviation Museum. It's at the College Park Airport, which is a county airport. It's where Wilbur Wright taught the first Army officers how to fly. It's a historic field, but there's a lovely museum there, which is a Smithsonian affiliate, which you could become. And this place has become a center post of the community for educators. My wife is a third grade teacher, and before COVID, and they can't wait to take the kids back to College Park Aviation Museum. And every year I'd go in and do my thing about the Wright brothers for the third graders and relate it to what they're teaching in third grade math. And elementary math teachers, my wife is one, fractions, decimals, and percents, can you help us reinforce that? You sure as heck can. And the kids come and they are enthralled. They can't wait to see the Wright brothers airplane. You could totally do that here. We had displays down at Wright Brothers National Memorial in Kitty Hawk, interactive displays. And the beautiful thing about having a reproduction, especially a Wright Experience reproduction, is it is the real thing. It's just brand new. It's also got the advantage of not being historic. So you can do things with it. You can demonstrate things with it. If something breaks, you can fix it. You're not breaking history. So you've got something you can actually work with. I developed a curriculum for 5th and 6th grade math students at Fort Belvoir Elementary School, working with their STEM teacher. I co-taught the class. And the first thing we did was meet with the teachers. What do your kids always need reinforcement on in math? Fractions, decimals, and percents. Fractions, decimals, and percents. So we adapted lessons and projects that can be built in class with classroom materials, styrofoam plates, pieces of 8.5 by 11 printer paper, and little rubber band powered airplanes. And we went kites, gliders, powered airplanes. The kids taking measurements, flying things. I co-taught this class for 3 years. Worked every single time. And we were able to give something that the teachers knew was relevant to what they were trying to explain in class. And that's the key to coming up with something that has a purpose and that can be effective educationally. Go to the teachers and ask them, and they'll tell you. And so something like this, in fact, I just had this experience. If we could just go back one. This was just this summer. These are high school kids from all over the country. I led a tour in D.C. for the Smithsonian, showing them the relevant aeronautical spots in D.C. And the very first place I took them, and I said, this is the point of origin, the castle. This is where it starts, because Langley started throwing little rubber band powered airplanes in there. And these are very high-end kids, high school kids. They were very, very knowledgeable and sophisticated, but they didn't know. And they got very interested when we went out to Hazy and we looked at the Grand Aerodrome. They were just like, whoa, look at that. So it's a really sticky story. I've done more presentations for kids on early flight than I can count. And it's so enthralling and exciting to them because they can grasp it. They can see it. It's not some highly sophisticated drone. They'll get to that. But something like this, they can engage with it. So you've got an amazing opportunity to do that here, to bring them here. And especially here, and you'll see at College Park Aviation Museum, one whole wall of the museum is glass so you can see the airplanes. And that relationship is made. The connection is made from then to now, right now.
So what are we looking for from you? Really, the goal here is to spread the word. We can't do this on our own. Our board is 4 volunteers that have put a lot of time and energy into this effort and a lot of money. There are a lot of things that we need help with. Probably the biggest is just getting word out. If you have a Facebook page, please take a picture of tonight, share it on Facebook, help us grow our Facebook page. We have our Facebook over here. We feel this is something that people who live in Stafford or have lived in Stafford for part of their lives would be interested in helping us with. We're going to send out after this just a form asking for feedback on what we talked about, any ideas you have, how we might be able to make it better, how we might be able to make our message stronger, where we might be able to go to find funding to pull this off. Political support. There are some politicians here. We're looking for your help any way you can. We have talked to folks at the General Assembly about some funding for this. Last year, we were hopeful that would be included, but there were a lot of priorities on the list. We're going to try again this year. Strategic partnerships. If you know of any groups that may be willing to be a corporate sponsor for this, please let us know. We do have a sponsorship package in the works. We have hired through a grant from the EDA a company that has put together our marketing videos that will be our social media launch coming up. We'll be targeting aviation businesses throughout the country for help. But if there are folks you know of who would be interested in this that we may want to pitch that to, we would appreciate that. Strategic partnerships. Stafford County Historical Society is a big partner. Stafford County Schools is one we really want to partner with. There are so many groups that are already here that are working that we'd like to get help from to help spread this message because we think it will help the entire region with its business growth, its tourism opportunities, and STEM education. And the last one was STEM curriculum. As Paul pointed out, we don't believe that we have the answers when it comes to STEM curriculum, so we would like help in developing that at a local level. As Paul said, it's more important to hear what the teachers need and what they think will work than us applying what we believe would work on them. There's no way it would work. So that's our presentation. We wanted to open up for questions, but we appreciate you being here, and yes, sir.
For our speaker, from the historical record, what interactions were there between Langley and the Wright brothers?
They were certainly aware of each other. Langley actually invited the Wright brothers to come visit them. Octave Chanute went down to Kitty Hawk when the Wright brothers were flying gliders, and he would report back to Langley. So they were very much aware of one another. The Wright brothers were very secretive guys, and they just never responded to Langley's invitation.
When the Wrights made their initial letter inquiry to the Smithsonian, it was not Langley that responded?
No, that was probably a gentleman named Rathbun. But yes, that's the thing. Smithsonian's the point of origin because Langley had done what it has done and the Smithsonian was what it was and is what it is. The very first place that Wilbur Wright wrote was the Smithsonian because that's where they had it. You know, I want to throw something else in, just a point on the tourism thing. You know, the fact that you have airplanes flying in and out of here and pilots coming in and out of here and you want to grow that and have pilots coming from around the country and all over and they see that hanging here, pilots love them some history. And I would bet you a $100 hamburger that a lot of them aren't that aware of this story and would be, or maybe have heard something about it in the past, but to actually see it and make the relevance and the importance of what happened here come alive, that word will get spread. That word will get spread. Pilots love to talk on that.
Yeah, and we just want to mention, we're not making the claim that Langley was the precursor to the Wright brothers. There's a lot of controversy about that. He had a different solution, and much of what you see here, very little of that, if any, made it into the Wright Flyer. He was more an inspirational person to those who pursued flight. Their plane was different. So we're certainly not wading into the debate that he was first. They were not. They certainly were first manned, powered, controlled flight, and they get the credit for that. But there were influences on them, perhaps not in the design, but it being inspired to pursue it in the first place. Yes?
Not too long ago, we lost a president who actually observed this happening. Miss Annie Moncure. She sat there on the banks and watched it. She sold it.
Okay. Ms. Knight said that we, not too long ago, lost a resident, it was a while ago, Annie Moncure, who told her that she actually witnessed the flight sitting on the bank and watching it. So it would have been great to have gotten that historical record recorded prior to that, but thank you. It's not that long ago. Anyone else? Okay. We're not here to pump you for donations, but if anyone wants to buy any of our stuff in there, those are gifts. They're not purchases, but if you want to make a donation, we do have gifts to hand out. If not, that's fine. It's more important for us to spread our message than anything else, but we were asked by some folks how they could help, and we have a GoFundMe. We will promote that on social media as we go forward, but tonight was really about just helping tell the story so you too knew it and were able to help us tell that as well as we go forward. So I think that's it. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
There's still food and beverage, so if anyone wants to get some additional drinks or food, please help yourself. Thank you.